Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Sunday, March 22nd, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside will reach a high of 89.5 degrees today, with a low of 54.8. It is Sunday, March 22nd, 2026, which is World Water Day, making it a great time to reflect on our precious global resources. On today's show, we examine how the massive energy demands of artificial intelligence are shaping new discussions around nuclear power regulations. We also explore the Trump administration's perspective on the detention of migrant children and why they frame that policy as a choice. We will also cover a selection of other stories making headlines. All this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning. We're starting today with a story that touches everything from your electricity bill to the future of artificial intelligence. The Trump administration's push to overhaul nuclear energy regulation is moving at a pace critics call reckless and supporters call long overdue. Ethan covers energy policy for us and has been tracking this one closely. Ethan, set the stage here. What exactly is the administration trying to do?
So at its core, this is about merging two massive priorities into one. The administration wants the United States to dominate the global AI race, and it's decided nuclear power is the only energy source that can get it there. Tech companies like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon need constant, carbon-free electricity to run enormous data centers. The initiative they're calling Doji Goes Nuclear essentially hands the keys of nuclear regulation to people who think like Silicon Valley, not like traditional safety engineers. ProPublica and NPR have both described it as a hostile takeover of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
And DOGE, that's the Department of Government Efficiency run by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. How involved are they inside the NRC day-to-day?
Very involved, and that's what's alarming to career staff. ProPublica's investigative team reported that a Doji staffer named Seth Cohen was embedded within NRC leadership without a formal supervisor. He reportedly told career employees, quote, "Assume the NRC is going to do whatever we tell the NRC to do," end quote. That's a pretty stark departure from an agency that's supposed to be independent by law. And it didn't stop there. The administration fired NRC Commissioner Christopher Hansen back in June of last year, the first firing of a commissioner in the agency's entire history, after he pushed back on efforts to weaken that independence.
That firing was 9 months ago now. What's happened to the workforce since then?
It's been devastating. A Government Accountability Office report from last month documented roughly 400 experienced personnel leaving the NRC in 2025 alone. They use the word exodus, and that's not hyperbole. On top of that, the NRC's own Inspector General found that the agency's workforce tracking systems were unreliable. There was a hiring freeze throughout all of last year, so the senior health physicists and operations engineers needed for rigorous safety reviews simply aren't being replaced. You're losing institutional knowledge that took decades to build, and there's no pipeline to get it back quickly.
So the people who know how to evaluate whether a reactor is safe are walking out the door. Meanwhile, the rules themselves are changing too.
That's the part that worries scientists the most. For over 50 years, radiation safety in this country has rested on two pillars. One is the linear no-threshold model, which assumes there's no perfectly safe dose of radiation. The other is the ALARA standard, which stands for as low as reasonably achievable. Both are now effectively being abandoned. Proponents in the administration, citing work from Idaho National Laboratory and the Breakthrough Institute, argue that the no safe dose idea was always a policy choice, not a hard scientific fact. They say there's no statistically significant evidence of harm below 10,000 millirem, which is far above previous limits.
And the administration is also pointing to something called hormesis?
Right. Internal reports presented to the Commission suggested that low doses of radiation might actually trigger protective biological responses, essentially that a little radiation could stimulate DNA repair mechanisms. That's the hormesis hypothesis. It's a real area of research, but it's far from settled science. Critics say using it to justify rolling back precautionary standards is a massive leap. The administration frames the old approach as dose minimization at any cost, and they want to replace it with what they call a risk-informed, performance-based framework. They claim this could cut licensing times by 40%.
Faster licensing is the goal, but what about actual oversight at existing and new facilities?
That's shrinking dramatically. The NRC has implemented a 38% reduction in direct inspection hours at nuclear sites. Baseline security inspections have been cut in half, and that includes the force-on-force exercises, which are essentially simulated attacks designed to test whether a plant can withstand a real threat. On top of that, over 750 pages of security and environmental directives have been consolidated into a single 23-page order. The stated purpose is to speed up deployment of small modular reactors, but the practical effect is that there are fewer eyes on safety and fewer rules governing what those eyes look for.
And there's a hard deadline driving all of this. Tell us about the July 4th mandate.
Executive Order 14301 directs the Department of Energy to ensure that at least 3 advanced reactors achieve what's called operational criticality by July 4th of this year. That's a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction. Career experts have called this timeline dangerously compressed. We're talking about roughly 3.5 months from today to get multiple experimental reactors up and running. Traditionally, this process involves years of review, testing, and iteration. The administration is using DOE authorization to bypass traditional NRC licensing entirely for these projects.
So who's actually building these reactors? Where do things stand right now?
The frontrunner is a company called ALO Atomics. Just 2 days ago, on March 20th, they unveiled a completed critical test reactor at Idaho National Laboratory. They're expected to achieve criticality within weeks. Then there's Antares Nuclear, whose demonstration reactor is in core fabrication and reportedly on track for July. Radiant Industries recently finished passive cool-down tests on their Kaleidos microreactor and is preparing for startup at a facility in Idaho as well. And then there's Oklo, which is chaired by OpenAI's Sam Altman. An Oklo subsidiary called Atomic Alchemy is accelerating a reactor designed to provide baseline power for specialized AI hardware manufacturing. The Information and ProPublica have both reported on how deeply intertwined the tech industry and this regulatory overhaul have become.
Sam Altman, chairing a reactor company while advising on nuclear policy, feels like it raises conflict of interest questions.
It absolutely does, and critics have been vocal about that. Altman's dual role as head of OpenAI and chairman of Oklo puts him at the intersection of the two industries this initiative is designed to serve. He's not the only tech figure with deep ties to the process, but he's the most visible. The broader concern is that the people shaping regulation are the same people who stand to profit from loosening it. That's a dynamic safety advocates say is fundamentally at odds with the NRC's original mission as an independent watchdog.
Speaking of safety advocates, what's the opposition looking like?
It's coming from multiple directions. ABC News and CNN have both covered growing alarm from groups like the Union of Concerned Scientists. Their core argument is simple but powerful. A mistake in nuclear power isn't a software bug you can patch. It's a multi-generational catastrophe. There's also grassroots energy building. Just yesterday, an open letter published through ResistBot from constituents in Michigan urged Senators Alyssa Slotkin and Gary Peters to codify NRC independence and require rigorous environmental reviews. The letter warned that the NRC was being turned from a watchdog into a rubber stamp.
Is Congress doing anything about this?
There's been some movement in the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. NRC Commissioner Bradley Crowell recently testified that the agency is under immense pressure to rubber stamp reactors that have already been approved by the DOE or the Department of Defense. That testimony was significant because it came from inside the commission itself, but whether Congress acts quickly enough to change the trajectory before July is an open question. The legislative process moves slowly, and this administration is deliberately moving fast.
So where does all of this leave us as of today?
We're in genuinely uncharted territory. The United States is operating under a new paradigm where energy policy and AI policy are essentially the same thing. The administration is betting that American dominance in artificial intelligence depends on getting these reactors online as fast as possible, and they're willing to reshape a half-century of safety infrastructure to do it. Whether that's visionary leadership or a dangerous gamble depends on who you ask. But the stakes are enormous either way, And the July 4th deadline is now just over 3 months out, with a depleted workforce and radically altered safety standards.
Ethan, thank you. We'll obviously keep following this one closely. And still ahead, we've got one more story to get to this morning, so stay with us. We turn now to our second story this morning, and it's a difficult one. Immigrant children held at a federal detention center in South Texas are enduring conditions that legal advocates are calling a hellhole. Chloe has been following the court filings and reporting on this. Chloe, where do things stand right now?
Grace, the facility in question is the South Texas Family Residential Center in Dilley, Texas. It's run by the private prison company CoreCivic, and it's one of the largest family detention sites in the country. Over the past few months, a wave of court filings and investigative reports from the Associated Press, the Washington Post, and ProPublica have painted a really alarming picture. We're talking about systemic failures in medical care, nutrition, and mental health services. And just 2 days ago, on March 20th, attorneys filed their latest round of complaints, documenting what they call serious, safe, and sanitary violations.
So let's start with the legal framework here. There are rules about how long children can be held in these facilities, right?
There are, and they've been in place for almost 3 decades. The Flores Settlement Agreement from 1997 says immigrant children must be released to parents, relatives, or licensed programs within 20 days. But according to reports from WFTV and WSLS, roughly 595 children were held past that 20-day limit just in December and January alone. The average length of stay at Dilley has reportedly climbed to 63 days, and it gets worse from there. About 265 children were detained for more than 50 days, and 55 children were held for over 100 days.
Over 100 days for some of these kids. What has the court said about that?
Chief U.S. District Judge Dolly Gee, who oversees the Flores Agreement out of the Central District of California, formally declared in early March that the facility is in serious violation of the law. She didn't mince words. She called Dilley a prison-like facility and said the children there are being treated as criminals rather than as vulnerable individuals seeking safety. That language really matters because it signals how far the court believes the government has strayed from its legal obligations.
What are the actual day-to-day conditions these families are living in?
Legal monitors from the National Center for Youth Law and Children's Rights have submitted testimony that's honestly hard to hear. According to the Midland Daily News, families reported finding worms and dead flies in their meals, specifically in servings of broccoli and cauliflower. Other complaints mentioned moldy food, stale graham crackers, and milk that smelled off. The tap water has been described as cloudy and foul-smelling, causing frequent stomach problems. Families reportedly have to fight just to get access to clean bottled water.
And what about the living spaces themselves?
The facility uses these modular cottages, which are essentially metal trailers. Advocates describe a militarized atmosphere with 24/7 lighting and high chain-link fences surrounding the grounds. The hand soap provided for showers has apparently caused widespread skin rashes among children. On top of all that, the facility has dealt with virus outbreaks, including measles, and prolonged lockdowns that severely restrict movement. So you've got kids who are already scared and far from home, stuck in a place that looks and feels like a prison.
You mentioned mental health. How are these children holding up emotionally?
That might be the most heartbreaking part of all this. ABC News and the Associated Press highlighted the case of a 13-year-old girl who attempted suicide by cutting her wrists with a plastic knife. According to those reports, facility staff had withheld her prescribed antidepressants, and she'd been denied her request to see her mother during a lockdown. The Department of Homeland Security initially claimed no detainees were on suicide watch, but discharge documents obtained by the AP confirmed the self-harm incident actually happened.
That's devastating. Has DHS addressed that contradiction?
Not directly, no. And that gap between what officials say publicly and what the documents show has been a recurring theme in this story. The administration has largely tried to deflect scrutiny rather than engage with specific cases. Legal advocates say that pattern makes independent monitoring all the more critical, because the families inside often have no way to speak for themselves.
There's also been a case involving a very young child that drew a lot of attention. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, that's Liam Conejo Ramos, a 5-year-old boy whose detention sparked national protests. U.S. District Judge Fred Beardy ordered his release back in early February because of procedural violations during his apprehension in Minnesota. But just 3 days ago, on March 19th, an immigration judge denied his family's asylum claim. So even when courts intervene on one front, these families can still face enormous legal barriers on another. His case has really become a symbol of how complicated and harsh the system can be, especially for young children.
How is the administration defending all of this?
The Trump administration and DHS have pushed back hard. They've dismissed the Flores settlement as, in their words, a tool of the left and a waste of taxpayer resources. A DHS spokesperson said, quote, "Being in detention is a choice," end quote, arguing that families choose to stay by not opting for voluntary departure. The reasoning is that because families can technically agree to leave the country, their continued detention is something they're bringing on themselves.
What does that voluntary departure option actually look like in practice?
According to the Los Angeles Times and information posted on DHS.gov, the administration has been heavily promoting the CBP Home app, which used to be called CBP One. In January, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem announced what they're calling an exit bonus of $2,600 and a free one-way flight for families who use the app to agree to self-deportation. Families can also pursue what's called stipulated removal, which means waiving their right to an asylum hearing entirely. So the government is saying these families have options, but critics point out that both of those options mean giving up any chance at protection in the United States.
So advocates don't see this as a real choice?
Not at all. Children's rights and other legal organizations have called it an illusion of choice. They point out there's virtually no path for these families to be released into the U.S. interior to await asylum hearings without either a protracted legal fight or a specific court order. The administration has curtailed alternatives to detention programs that used to allow families to live in communities while their cases were processed. So the reality is, you either agree to leave the country or you stay locked up with your kids indefinitely. For a parent fleeing violence, that's not a meaningful choice.
Judge Gee has been pretty forceful in her response. What has she ordered so far?
She has. On March 9th, she awarded $7 million in legal fees to the National Center for Youth Law and other organizations involved in the case. She praised their, quote, dogged advocacy, end quote, in protecting the rights of minors. Then, following that major filing on March 20th, she ordered several immediate interventions. She wants a child-by-child accounting of every minor held longer than 20 days. She's called for an independent medical assessment of mental health services at Dilley. And she's ordered an unannounced inspection of the kitchen facilities by the Juvenile Care Monitor.
Is there a timeline for enforcement here?
There is. A formal enforcement hearing is scheduled for the final week of March, so just days from now. Judge Gee has expressed extreme skepticism toward the government's arguments. She said directly that, quote, being in detention is not a choice for children, end quote, which is a clear rebuke of the administration's framing. Advocates are pushing for strict enforcement of the 20-day limit and have even suggested the court should consider shutting down the Dilley facility entirely if conditions aren't brought into compliance immediately.
So we could see some major developments before the end of the month?
Absolutely. That hearing could result in contempt findings, new release orders, or even structural changes to how the facility operates. The court has the authority to impose sanctions, and given Judge Gee's tone in recent rulings, she doesn't appear inclined to give the government much more leeway. This is a story that's moving fast, and whatever happens at that hearing will likely set the direction for family detention policy in the months ahead.
Chloe, thank you for walking us through all of that. Really important reporting to stay on top of.
Thanks, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. Cuba is finding it difficult to stay current after its national electrical grid suffered a total collapse on Saturday, March 21, 2026. This shocking development plunged the island's 11 million residents into darkness for the third time this month and the second time in a single week. Officials say the spark that started this latest blackout was an unexpected breakdown at Unit Number 6 of the Nuevitas thermoelectric plant in Camagüey, which tripped a cascading failure across the nation's aging infrastructure. The government is attempting to shed some light on the situation by using micro-islands of generation to prioritize hospitals, but they admit total recovery will be a slow, dim climb. This energy crisis is being fueled by a decaying Soviet-era system and a halt in petroleum shipments from Venezuela, leaving citizens to deal with power rations of up to 12 hours a day. In East Darfur, a tragic development has left a community in mourning after an airstrike on the Al-Din Teaching Hospital. The Friday, March 20th attack killed at least 64 people, including 13 children and several medical staff members. The World Health Organization confirms that the facility is now completely non-functional after its maternity and pediatric departments were reduced to rubble. While rights groups have pointed a finger at the Sudanese military, the army has denied the charge, suggesting the strike was intended for a nearby police station. This heart-wrenching event marks a grim milestone in the civil war, as total fatalities from attacks on healthcare facilities have now eclipsed 2,000 since the conflict began in April 2023. Moving to the United States, Idaho is looking to keep its voter data on a need-to-know basis. Secretary of State Phil McGrain has formally rejected the Department of Justice's demand for unredacted voter rolls, citing the state's fiercely independent history. Idaho is one of only 6 states exempt from the 1993 National Voter Registration Act, and McGrain argues the federal government has no legal standing to seize the sensitive data of over 1 million voters. While the administration claims the information is needed to purge non-citizens before the 2026 midterms, Idaho is standing its ground against what it calls federal overreach. The situation with Iran is proving to be a crude awakening for global markets. President Trump has issued a series of contradictory statements regarding the 4-week-old war, claiming the U.S. is winding down military efforts while simultaneously threatening to obliterate Iranian power plants if the Strait of Hormuz isn't opened within 48 hours. The administration is certainly fueling the fire of confusion by deploying more troops while unexpectedly lifting sanctions on 140 million barrels of Iranian oil to help lower prices. This policy volatility has seen oil prices surge 50% to over $100 a barrel. Finally, China is making a move that might take the shine off the renewable energy market. Starting April 1st, Beijing will eliminate value-added tax rebates on solar panel exports. This taxing situation is expected to drive up costs across Africa, a continent that relies on China for 80% of its solar technology. With battery storage incentives also dropping from 9% to 6%, the era of artificially cheap pricing is coming to a close. Industry experts expect a 5 to 10% price adjustment, which may lead to a stockpiling rush as nations try to save for a rainy day. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.